Hey friends, Ash here. Welcome back to Gents. Armani has dropped another Acqua Di Gio flanker. I could have never seen this coming. And this one is named Eau de Parfum Intense. Because everybody out there was just thinking to themselves, man, I really want a flanker that kind of like just randomly flops there between the EDP and the Parfum. Hell yeah. They have heard you. It is here. That was a terrible throw. Much better. I'm gonna have this one linked in the description. Let's go ahead and take a look at the presentation and I'll let you guys know what is going on here, because you do want to know. Trust me. Le box. Very plain. On the front, you just have the name of the house, name of the fragrance, size, and concentration. Eau de Parfum Intense is the concentration. GA up top. On one side, you have a QR code. On the other side, you have nothing. On the back, your ingredients, also your barcode. On the bottom, your badge code, and another QR code. The badge code is 38Z002P, or not 2P. That is the question. And here we have the bottle, which basically just looks like an inversed version of the Eau de Parfum. I mean, check that out. That's exactly what this is. So you've got a nice gradient here, dark up top, lighter at the bottom, Acqua Di Gio in lighter print, and then Eau de Parfum Intense and Giorgio Armani in black. You have GA on top of the cap, a sticker on the bottom with your badge code. The cap does click into place, and you have a little GA on top of the atomizer as well. Let's blast a couple sprays. Good. Now, in my mind, Giorgio Armani is one of the most confusing designer houses right now. Not because their fragrances are bad, but because it feels like they're just kind of winging it. They have made it so confusing for people that don't follow fragrances religiously as to what their stuff even is right now. Stick with me here. They came out with Acqua Di Gio Profondo, right? But then they came out with Acqua Di Gio Profondo, Eau de Parfum. The same thing, but they changed the presentation. They changed the fragrance a bit as well. Then they dropped the Eau de Toilette and the Parfum versions of that. That's fine. They're building out the Profondo line. They reformulated the Eau de Toilette, put it into a new bottle. They changed the bottle style of the Eau de Parfum. They discontinued Profumo. They came out with Acqua Di Gio Parfum, which smells like the discontinued Profumo. Just a lot of different moving parts going on with the fragrance line. And then the same thing with Armani Code. They discontinued Profondo. They discontinued Absolu. They discontinued the Eau de Parfum, but then they came out with the Eau de Parfum just in a different bottle. And the new Eau de Parfum doesn't smell like the discontinued Eau de Parfum. It smells like the discontinued Profumo. What is going on? Armani is just doing a lot of like, that's discontinued. Oh, people miss it. Bring it back. But discontinue the other thing to bring back the thing we already discontinued. What are we doing? So when this one was first announced, the name Eau de Parfum Intense makes you think it's going to be a more intense version of the Eau de Parfum, yeah. And they also clearly set up the presentation to look very similar as well. So how does it smell and how close is it to the EDP? Because if it's just a more intense version of this, it makes you question, why does it exist to begin with? Comes across like a cash grab, like what's next, you know? The Parfum Intense, and then the Parfum Intensely Absolu. Great. Well, the official note breakdown of this new one is pretty simplistic. It has bergamot and apple off the top. Then it has marine notes and clary sage as it heads through the mid. And then basically woody notes and amber in the base. So a lot of people would just interpret that as amber woods. So this new version, it opens up very fresh and clean and bright when you spray it on, and it is not super similar to the Eau de Parfum, actually. It is noticeably less aromatic than the Eau de Parfum, which is good for me because the Eau de Parfum is probably one of my least favorite Acqua Di Gio fragrances out there right now. Maybe the only one I have under it is Profondo Parfum. And the reason for that is Acqua Di Gio Eau de Parfum has a very noticeable clary sage that comes across herbal, aromatic, like leafy type of green. And it can just be a little bit much because most of the time if you're wearing an Acqua Di Gio, you want something that's just gonna be fresh and easy to wear and versatile. And this one, the way it hits you with that herbal edge can kind of make it a little more off-putting. So this new version, the Eau de Parfum Intense, thankfully, does not actually smell like an intense version of the Eau de Parfum because then it would just be an overload of that clary sage note. Instead, this one is a sweeter, shinier type of freshness compared to the EDP, way easier to wear, way less aromatic. Also, the apple note that you're gonna get here is not a huge blast of apple. It's more so kind of melded together with that citrus, with that bergamot. So it's not gonna be like a massive apple note and then a little touch of citrus underneath. They're kind of working hand in hand here because you have that nice brightness from the citrus. You have that brisk opening from the citrus. The apple works as like a little sweetener. Yeah, just kind of a little sweetener worked in there. So you get that sparkle from the citrus, but then it's it's lightly sugared on top, and it just makes it a little more appealing. And underneath that apple bergamot combo lurks the ever-present Acqua Di Gio DNA. So if you're familiar with all the other Acqua Di Gio fragrances out there, you know that common thread that runs through them. This has that as well. It is more that modern type of Acqua Di Gio, a semi-minerality to it, a semi-mineral water note. It is that more modern take on the Acqua Di Gio DNA, kind of like water running over stones. You know, it has that little bit of minerality to it, which frankly I love. I mean, I really, really dig that updated take, and that's kind of how this is underneath that opening. And here's the weird part. It's named Eau de Parfum Intense. So you're thinking the closest Acqua Di Gio to this one probably will be this one, but it isn't. And I know I've said that already, so you're like, yeah, we get it, but it really is not. In the opening or the dry down, which we'll talk about here in a second, it is actually closer to this. Huh? What is going on at Armani? Acqua Di Gio Absolu. Now, if you're unaware, Acqua Di Gio Absolu obviously is discontinued nowadays. And I think this one was ahead of its curve. Even when it came out, I wasn't immediately enthralled by this stuff, and a lot of people weren't. But then over time, people wore it more, gave it more of a chance, and it was like, that's actually good. But kind of like a cult classic type of fragrance where the people who knew, and everybody else who just wrote it off immediately were like, nah, stuff sucks. Now, Acqua Di Gio Absolu, basically, if you just really want to like simplify it, is kind of like Invictus bubblegumminess meets Acqua Di Gio freshness. Also, to a lesser extent, if you're more familiar with the Y line, the way that comes across with the apple, you could say like a little bit of that. But the simplest way to think of it, kind of Invictus-ish meets Acqua Di Gio, that's pretty much what this was. Kind of ahead of the curve, because if you think about it, nowadays you've got multiple fragrances out there, cheap and more expensive, that are making use of that specific Acqua Di Gio sweet plus fresh combo and melding it with something else and being really successful doing that. This was one of the first that was trying to do that, and it got kind of dumped on for it. And then turns out later on down the road, people go, that's pretty good. So somehow Acqua Di Gio Eau de Parfum Intense smells like Armani quietly reviving Acqua Di Gio Absolu with like a little twist. Kind of like if you go to Acqua Di Gio Parfum and you smell that, it's similar to Acqua Di Gio Profumo, just with a little twist. This is essentially the same thing going on again, which I already kind of talked about this, but it goes to show that Armani is just kind of scrambling to an extent. They're taking stuff that was discontinued that people really liked, and they're like, modernize it a little bit and let's re-release it again, both in the Acqua Di Gio line and the Armani Code line. And I'm not gonna go through every single fragrance and say which ones they've done that with, which ones they haven't, but it's getting kind of common. Now, compared side by side off the top, there are some differences. Not massive, but they're there. The Eau de Parfum Intense is gonna be a little bit deeper compared to Absolu, slightly less bubblegummy. Absolu off the top, a little bit more playful leaning, you know, a slight candy sort of pop to it when you first spray it on. Eau de Parfum Intense keeps the same vibe, just makes it slightly more grown up. So it's a little bit more adult designer, but still right in that same vein. And then Absolu is a little bit more playful. Let's scoot this guy back over here, just to make it look cleaner. Into the mid, it tightens more into that modern Acqua Di Gio style, that modern DNA. The minerality, the aquatic freshness, and a sage and geranium combo working underneath. So that does give it a clean aromatic thread that works through the scent, but it's not at all as overbearing as in the Eau de Parfum. Even in the mid, this one is clearly more leaning in that direction. Which, to be fair, if you like that style, if you like that tweak, that change to the Acqua Di Gio DNA, then the Eau de Parfum will probably still be better for you than this new one. But I will say that for me, in the mid, the Eau de Parfum Intense does perfectly what Acqua Di Gio does, what it means for me. And that is that perfect balance of fresh and clean with just a little smattering of sweetness. It's not overboard, you know, it's not to the point that it can become something headache-inducing. It's just made to be worn by anyone, anywhere, anytime. That Aquatic Accord in Eau de Parfum Intense also in the mid is almost like a fresh fabric breeze. So it's fresh, it's smooth, it's clean, nothing overtly sea-like. It's not a dramatic ocean-heavy aquatic note is what I'm saying. The woodiness also becomes more apparent in the mid. It's structured, it's lightly dry, it's crisp, and it forms sort of a backbone that everything else works off of instead of being a focal point of the scent in the mid. It has a very faint tonkified aspect to it, so a little sweetness kind of working in underneath everything as well and smooths off the edges. The overall vibe in the mid is not complexity. It's not trying to change up what Acqua Di Gio really is or anything like that. It's built for real life. So it's just that type of fragrance that almost anybody can buy and wear. They're trying to get something out there that reaches back and grabs something from the past that people miss and people like, but also trying to do it in a way that's modern, clean, and easy to wear. And through the mid as well, just like the opening, it is clearly much more similar to Absolu than the original Eau de Parfum. And kind of like the opening as well, the main difference is it's slightly less sweet than Absolu side by side. It's a little bit more refined. And it is night and day different from the Eau de Parfum. There's not a whole heck of a lot of similarity between these two outside of they're both Acqua Di Gio, so they have that Acqua Di Gio DNA in them. But the Eau de Parfum is still greener, more aromatic. It has that herbal facet coming through much, much more clearly. It doesn't have the same sweet lift to it, and it doesn't have the same type of dry woodiness underneath. At least through the mid. Once you hit the full dry down, it does have a little bit of that woody aspect come through. Now through the opening and the mid, I would say Eau de Parfum Intense and Absolu are kind of right there, side by side. Maybe you prefer the extra sweetness in Absolu. Maybe you prefer the slightly more grown-up aspect of Eau de Parfum Intense, but they're still really similar. Once you hit that dry down is where Eau de Parfum Intense starts to actually earn some points over Absolu. Eau de Parfum Intense maintains that slightly sweet woodiness that stays smooth and gets smoother as it dries down. And that does do some heavy lifting because it keeps the fragrance from fully collapsing into just a generic, slightly sweet, watery scent profile. The minerality fades back as you hit the far dry down in Eau de Parfum Intense, but it maintains that aquatic freshness into the far dry down. And that does help it stay fresh even hours into wearing it as it settles into its amber woody base. Now, as I said, this is where it starts to score points on Absolu, and one of the main reasons why is Eau de Parfum Intense will outproject and outlast Acqua Di Gio Absolu. It is, to be fair, named Eau de Parfum Intense, right? And that word right there makes you think, well, it should last, but that doesn't always happen. Here, it does. Side by side, it outprojects, it outlasts Absolu pretty easily. The woody backbone of Absolu fades out sooner. You're not gonna get as much push. It doesn't hold its structure quite as well, whereas the Eau de Parfum Intense does. It's sturdier, the dry down feels like it just has more oomph to it, more depth to it, and that's where it earns its stripes. Because in the opening, it's gonna be like, oh, yeah, it's kind of Absolu with a little tweak and change, but once you hit that far dry down and this one is still projecting, it's still lasting, and this one is just a whisper, at that point, it makes sense why you would go for this over that, even if they both still existed. So speaking about that performance, while yes, off my skin, it does outperform Absolu pretty easily, the Eau de Parfum projects just about as hard as the Eau de Parfum Intense. And part of the reason for that is this one, the Eau de Parfum Intense, is safer. From the opening, the mid, the dry down, safer the whole way through. So it does have that sort of projection where you smell it, and it smells good, but you don't maybe immediately like snap your head to it, where you're like, oof, what is that? The Eau de Parfum will do that more, but not always positively, because it is, again, so aromatic in the opening and the mid that it can kind of grab attention potentially positively, but also potentially negatively. All of this just to say, if you're wearing these side by side, they'll project really well in the opening and the mid, both of them. But this one is more aggressive with how it comes across. This one is smoother. So depending on what you key in on, you might be like, ooh, that is just like really overwhelming, because you just kind of keep getting interrupted by it. Whereas this one is just an easy wear. And so it can be one of those deals where you're like, oh yeah, that's nice. You don't really think about it consciously. For me though, projection really solid with the Eau de Parfum Intense, longevity very good as well, especially considering it's a fresh scent. It should be a massive compliment puller, as pretty much all Acqua Di Gio fragrances are outside of a couple, especially because it makes use of this sort of scent profile, which was actually very good for getting attention. In terms of seasonality, it is an Acqua Di Gio. So what that means is realistically, whenever you want, but most people are gonna say spring, summer, daytime. You can though easily slide it into evening use, and realistically you can wear it year round. So all this is great, but the question we need to answer is, does this need to exist? As a fragrance by itself, if you just say, None of this exists. You're just evaluating it solely on how does this smell? The answer would be, it smells great, assuming you like Acqua Di Gio. It's enjoyable, it's easy to wear, it lasts, it gets attention. It is extremely versatile stuff. So as a fragrance by itself, it makes perfect sense. It also quietly brings back the Acqua Di Gio Absolu idea with a little bit of a refinement, a little bit of a tweak. And a lot of people are gonna be happy about that. People who maybe missed Absolu when it first came out, people who wore it back then and then it ran out, they're gonna be able to get this and it's gonna scratch some of the same itch. Not the exact same, but as far as everything in the Acqua Di Gio lineup that you can get right now, this is closest to this. But as a product in the Acqua Di Gio lineup, it's pretty confusing. The name Eau de Parfum Intense explicitly frames this as an intensified version of the Eau de Parfum, which it isn't. The name makes you think it's gonna be the Eau de Parfum, but louder, bolder, longer lasting. But in reality, it seems like Armani is just using the name as sort of a product placeholder. You know, they were like, we want this in the normal Acqua Di Gio lineup, but we already got the Eau de Toilette, we already got the Eau de Parfum, and we got the Parfum, so what do? We'll just stick it in there in between the Eau de Parfum and the Parfum and call it Intense. And this is now becoming a straight up trend for Armani. Something from the past that was discontinued, that had a cult following, they bring it back, and they just stuff it into a new bottle and just kind of shoehorn it in there and they're like, that's good. And if somebody says, well, why did you discontinue it to begin with if you were gonna do this? They go, fire that guy. Man, what a moron. This is genius. The guy doesn't understand. So it's both welcome that they're doing it and also kind of annoying at the same time. It's welcome because it smells good, it scratches the itch of bringing this back, and annoying because the Acqua Di Gio and also Armani Code lineups are becoming just really confusing about what they're even doing. And with the choice of basically just taking the Acqua Di Gio Eau de Parfum color scheme and just flipping it, they make it seem even more so like these two are joined at the hip, when in reality, they don't really have anything to do with each other. Does this mean that eventually the Acqua Di Gio Eau de Parfum is going to be phased out and then replaced by this one? Who knows? Could be. Or they just keep this one and that one at the same time. All I know is I can't wait for Acqua Di Gio Profondo Parfum 2027 edition, Acqua Di Gio Parfum Intensely, which will secretly just be Acqua Di Gio Essenza brought back to life, which will then be followed up by Acqua Di Gio Essenza Eau de Toilette, which will actually just be the original formulation of Acqua Di Gio Eau de Toilette when it first released, being re-released. At this rate, it's inevitable. So broken down the pros and cons, super quick. First, the pros. It's a modern, mass-appealing Acqua Di Gio that's super easy to wear. Also, it's Absolu adjacent in a good way. Solid performance for the category, big compliment puller, and it's gonna be a spring-summer king that easily works at night. The cons, the name, completely misleading. Has nothing to do with the Eau de Parfum, so a lot of people could be potentially confused if they don't keep up with the fragrance releases like it's a sport. So that added confusion, yeah, that's a con. And if you specifically love the original green styling of the Eau de Parfum and you were hoping it was going to be similar to that, you'll be disappointed. Everything else though, I think is awesome. I love Acqua Di Gio. I think this stuff smells great, but it may not get as much of a chance as it should because a lot of people, because of the name, may write this one off initially. All right guys, that'll do it for me. Thank you for hanging with me. Acqua Di Gio Eau de Parfum Intense, for me, way better than the original Eau de Parfum. Thank you guys for watching. Take care of yourselves. See you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.